Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, Velgrynd, in pursuit of Rudra's soul fragments, arrived on a human-inhabited planet and discovered that this was Tatsuya Konda's homeland, which was currently under phantom invasion. In this episode, we'll continue to follow Velgrynd as she gathers information about this world's situation and begins assisting the Emperor. So, let's get started. After discussing with the others, Velgrynd finally grasped the overall situation. At present, the leaders of all major nations in this world were aware of the phantom invasion, but they were helpless against this powerful species capable of possession. This trait suggested that the invading phantoms were indeed the same phantoms Velgrynd was familiar with. For example, in the battle where Tatsuya Konda perished, the fleet commander was possessed by a phantom. If they were to act recklessly, they risked not only failing to repel the enemy but potentially losing all their forces. A clear example was the defeated fleet of the Great Japan Conquering Empire. Theoretically, some forces should have survived, but no one returned. It was presumed that the entire fleet had fallen under phantom control. Therefore, all 5 nations had strictly ordered their forces to remain within their cities to avoid further losses from venturing out. Saburo Minamoto, Gensei Araki's disciple, suggested that if Master Gensei Araki, himself, Masahiko Amari, and other national heroes joined forces, they might stand a chance. But this depended on the enemy's strength being accurately reflected by Tatsuya Konda's intelligence, placing them at the Oni dragon level. To defeat monsters of that level, a sufficient number of warriors would be necessary. However, the greatest challenge was the unknowns, the enemy's true strength and numbers. As such, each nation prioritized self-defense, refusing to permit their strongest fighters to leave, and certainly not to send them to Japan Empire to face the invading phantoms together. Velgrynd nodded, expressing her intention to help them. However, she first needed to assess this world's strongest fighters to gauge the phantom's level of power. Her method was simple. She requested that Gensei Araki, the strongest among them, attack her. Since they mentioned that Gensei Araki's strength was on par with Tatsuya Konda's, Velgrynd only needed a rough estimation. Without further delay, the test began immediately. The scene shifted to the training ground, where Gensei appeared hesitant, wondering if he should truly use his sword against an unarmed Velgrynd. He was concerned about injuring her. After all, Gensei Araki had great confidence in his mastery of Hazy Style's highest technique and believed he could wound even the strongest opponent. Meanwhile, Velgrynd, dressed in her usual attire, didn't seem prepared for defense at all. She assured him that his weapon couldn't harm her in the slightest, and encouraged him to attack with all his strength. In reality, this human world had an exceptionally low magicule density, making it unlikely for weapons to evolve. Thus, while Gensei's katana was considered the strongest weapon in this world, it was only at the rare level. In a previous video, we covered weapon strength rankings, with rare being even lower than unique, which is quite low by comparison. Gensei Araki held his breath, focused all his battle aura, and unleashed Hazy Style's ultimate technique, Double Cherry Blossoms, 8 Petals Flash. In an instant, his katana split into 8 phantom blades, resembling petals as they surged toward Velgrynd at tremendous speed. With a loud impact, Gensei's attack struck Velgrynd. However, the sword petals didn't fully bloom. Gensei's ultimate technique had been stopped at Velgrynd's fingertips. Gensei Araki couldn't believe what he was seeing and admitted his defeat. This move, Double Cherry Blossoms, 8 Petals Flash, was a skill that even Tatsuya Konda hadn't mastered. But as readers, we know the gap between the two sides was simply too vast. Gensei Araki, seeming to realize this as well, asked if Velgrynd was a god. Velgrynd explained that her brother, the creator god, indeed created the world, but she herself was not a god. Well, Velgrynd could certainly be considered on the level of a deity, as true dragons embody aspects of nature itself. However, she remained modest and cautious. The reason was clear. Her defeat by that inexplicably powerful slime before crossing worlds had profoundly shifted her perspective. Gensei commented that, in his understanding, the creator god's sister would naturally be a god as well. Velgrynd humbly responded that the concept of a god varies from person to person, and even with her strength, beings existed who could destroy her, so she couldn't truly be considered divine. In that moment, Velgrynd thought of that laid-back slime, and though it annoyed her, she was sure that even if she were to fight him again, she would still be defeated by Rimuru. Yet she couldn't bring herself to see Rimuru as a god like her brother, so she didn't believe herself to be one either. Of course, Velgrynd hadn't yet encountered Masayuki or become friends with Rimuru at this point, so it was natural for her to still harbor some irritation. Through this brief battle with Gensei, Velgrynd had already grasped the general strength level of this world. Her conclusion was that this was a world with an extremely low concentration of magicule, making it very difficult to use magic, and physical strength was limited to natural, inherent levels. Although Gensei Araki's recent attack was impressive, it only reached the level of an ordinary attack from an A-rank monster in the Central World. Nonetheless, achieving such power in a magicule-scarce world as a human was already a remarkable feat, and Velgrynd couldn't help but admire his extraordinary talent. As for the invading phantom species, the first certainty was that they were semi-spiritual beings and needed to possess physical bodies to operate in this material world for extended periods. But, as mentioned, the human bodies in this world were weak, so the phantoms had to suppress their power to avoid causing physical collapse. Based on her estimations, an evil heaven mystic level would correspond to be level to A- level strength in the Central World, while an Oni dragon level would barely qualify as A level. At this point, Velgrynd was almost certain that the phantoms here were indeed the same phantoms she knew of. Of course, this assumed that the phantoms were suppressing their power. If they disregarded physical limits and aimed to destroy this world directly, they could unleash their full power to do so easily. However, such an action would negate the purpose of their invasion. With these conclusions, a faint smile appeared on Velgrynd's lips. She was glad she had arrived here, otherwise this world would have had no chance against the phantoms. Velgrynd was confident that even if Felway, the phantom leader, appeared here, she could handle him. She also understood that Feldway would never come to a place like this, so her concern was unfounded. In reality, the forces invading this world were just the advanced squad of phantoms under Cornu, one of the 3 mystic admirals, and even Cornu himself hadn't appeared yet. Their complete domination was still a long way off. Of course, Velgrind's assessment of Feldway's strength had some flaws. It only highlighted Feldway's incredible skill at concealing his true power. Having organized her thoughts, Velgrynd looked at the disheartened Gensei Araki, who felt defeated by the ineffectiveness of his strongest sword technique. Smiling, Velgrynd told him he had every reason to be proud. In a world almost devoid of magicule, few people could reach his level. Gensei was considerably stronger than Tatsuya Kanda had been when he first crossed over into the Central World. Velgrynd remarked that if Gensei could absorb enough magicule, he could reach the enlightened level and might even become a saint. Gensei looked bewildered, clearly unable to envision the heights Velgrynd described. Velgrynd then offered to help Gensei reforge his weapon as a reward for their sparring match. Using her authority of material creation, Velgrynd could create weapons of mythical level, as we discussed in the weapon introduction episode, and she planned to infuse Gensei's katana with her magicule, forcing it to evolve. Gensei was further astonished. This power to evolve a weapon seemed godlike. Although still somewhat skeptical, Gensei had seen enough of Velgrind's might to accept. He respectfully handed over his treasured ancestral katana to her. Velgrynd took the task exceptionally seriously. Normally, she could create mythical-level azure dragon blades with ease, but this time was different. She carefully analyzed the sword's components, made minute adjustments, and infused it with her own magicule. Her expression was even more focused than during battle. After about 30 minutes, the combination of ancient blacksmithing craftsmanship and Velgrind's precise magicule enhancement resulted in a sword that began to radiate with a mythical glow. This was a weapon of the highest mythic level, the kind of evolution that would normally take hundreds, if not thousands, of years to achieve. Velgrynd smiled and noted that this was a top-tier weapon that would be impossible to find in this world. She added that Gensei might not be able to fully harness its power right away, as the sword now possessed its own will. If the sword accepted him, he could even gain access to its inner strength. However, Velgrynd couldn't be certain if it would recognize Gensei himself, or one of his descendants. She then handed the weapon to the still-stunned Gensei. By evening, everyone gathered in the Emperor's quarters. Seeing the revolutionary aid Velgrynd had provided, the Emperor was convinced that she was now an ally. Velgrynd assured him that she would stay by his side to protect him. For Velgrynd, just being near Rudra was happiness enough, and she was willing to fulfill any request he made. However, the Emperor found it hard to believe that such a godlike being would pledge her loyalty to him. With a joking tone, he made an unreasonable request, asking if Velgrynd could make all conflict disappear from this world so that he could live in peace. Velgrynd chuckled effortlessly and replied that it wouldn't be a problem. If the Emperor wished, she could gift him this world as a present, erasing people, nations, or whatever he wanted without difficulty. But first, she would need to eliminate the bothersome phantoms. The entire room fell silent as they watched Velgrind's smiling face. Even the maids attending to them dropped their spoons in shock. Everyone could sense that Velgrynd was dead serious. If anyone else had made such a statement, it might have been dismissed as absurd, but no one doubted Velgrind's words. Everyone present agreed on that. Yet, the Emperor, as a bearer of Rudra's soul, shared Rudra's characteristics. He replied happily, saying that Velgrind's willingness alone was enough to satisfy him. He realized, however, that Velgrynd would truly do anything for him. It was the first time the old Emperor had felt this way. As a king, his life had been bound by duty, with little freedom, even in matters of love and marriage, which were always tied to power and politics. Although he wielded seemingly limitless power, the freedom to do as he pleased was a luxury he rarely experienced. This made Velgrind's bold and carefree nature all the more astonishing to him. Perhaps this was the difference between a god and an emperor. Even though he understood he was merely a stand-in for another emperor named Rudra, Velgrind's openness and freedom left a deep impression on him, even making him feel somewhat bashful. With these thoughts, the Emperor and Velgrynd shared an enjoyable dinner together. After that, the Emperor appointed Velgrynd as his protector so that she could attend important meetings. This role wasn't just a visible position like Gensei Araki's. It also included figures who operated unseen in the shadows, making the position less likely to raise suspicion among the ministers. Velgrynd understood this well and intended to play the part of the Emperor's loyal subordinate. She donned the military uniform of the Japan Empire, and even changed her hair to black, since her usual blue was too eye-catching, as she prepared for the upcoming war council. The next day, people began to gather at the main headquarters for the meeting. The great Japan conquering empire's military was divided between the navy and army, and both branches' ministers were in attendance. In the last war, the Japan Empire's navy had suffered a disastrous defeat, and the strange circumstances of the battle had prompted all factions, including those of other countries, to investigate what had happened. However, Japan Empire's own army did not engage in this investigation, citing the lack of means to reach the sea. The Emperor understood, though, that the real reason was the army's failure to grasp the gravity of the threat posed by the war and their constant desire to assert superiority over the navy. Such was human nature. Although the Emperor knew the petty schemes of the army generals and understood their foolishness, he also knew he couldn't openly highlight these divisions if he wanted to maintain harmony among the various factions. This was yet another example of the restrictions that bound a king's freedom. As the meeting began, as if to confirm the Emperor's concerns, an army general suddenly shouted, questioning Velgrind's presence and stating that a sacred military council was no place for a woman. Those with inflated egos often concern themselves with social status, gender, or other superficial issues. Despite Velgrynd being introduced as the Emperor's protector, the situation had naturally escalated into this. Velgrynd gave the shouting general a dismissive glance. He continued to insult her, his words increasingly disrespectful. Then, in an instant, the noise stopped. Moving with a speed beyond human comprehension, Velgrynd seized the man by his collar and lifted him off the ground. She then shoved a handgun into his open, nervous mouth. Velgrynd coldly remarked that, unlike in the age of melee weapons, in a time where a simple pull of the trigger could kill, it no longer mattered whether the killer was a man or a woman. She continued, stating that what mattered in war was the ability to remain calm, control emotions, and make sound judgments. The general's outburst, in her view, hardly suited the demeanor expected of a true military leader. Seeing this scene, the people around them began to stir. The army officials threatened Velgrynd, demanding that she release the chief of staff and called for the guards. The mere presence of a handgun, even without knowing Velgrind's exact identity, made everyone aware of the danger she posed. Velgrynd laughed dismissively, remarking that such a trivial toy had frightened this group of cowardly fools, a sorry reflection on the Empire's military strength. Ignoring the others, Velgrynd unceremoniously dropped the chief of staff to the ground, then pulled the trigger. The chief frantically tried to escape, but in that instant, a stream of water shot from the gun's barrel, soaking his pants between his legs. With a smirk, Velgrynd noted that it seemed the chief of staff had wet himself. Furious, he began to retort, but upon meeting Velgrind's gaze, he fell silent, realizing that if he continued to provoke her, this woman might genuinely kill him. Admitting his rudeness, he acknowledged that as a general, he shouldn't have let his temper take control. Velgrynd, feeling in good spirits, decided to let his insolence slide. The Navy minister seized the moment to quietly ask Gensei Araki who this woman was. Gensei explained that she was his colleague, the Emperor's protector, and had been permitted by the Emperor to attend today's meeting. Velgrynd introduced herself as Dragon Phoenix, a fitting name as it combined elements of her true dragon nature and her command over fire. But the name once again sparked an uproar, with officials muttering that it was too arrogant, disrespectful to the Emperor, and overstepping boundaries. Observing this from the adjoining room, the Emperor sighed, knowing full well that Velgrynd had simply chosen a random alias to conceal her identity. She'd even gone to the effort of a disguise, dyeing her hair to match the black color typical of the Japanese people. The Emperor entered the room, stating that at a time of life-and-death crisis, it was also his time to deploy his trump card. Nothing was beyond reason. With these words, all the ministers bowed in submission, accepting Velgrind's alias of Dragon Phoenix as her official title. Alright, that's all for this video. As always, the names don't really matter, and the story itself isn't crucial. Volume 17 is all about adding background context. It's worth noting that Gensei Araki is actually Byakuya Araki's younger brother, and the head of hazy style in this world. Of course, we know that in the central world, there are even stronger hazy style techniques, such as 100 Petals Rush and Rimura's unique imaginary collapse haze, myriad variety petals. We also saw Velgrind's evolving perception of Rimuru after her defeat. She recognized that even if she were to fight him again, she would still lose, yet she couldn't quite accept him as a divine being like her brother. This inner conflict will gradually fade as their relationship improves in the future. In the next episode, we'll continue Velgrind's journey with another exciting story. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.